What is up, YouTube? It is Coach Kolton here to bring you physique development tools, skills, and opinions that hopefully you can use for yourself to make some gains. In this video here today, I wanted to cover a review I've recently read on the ketogenic diet as a particular use for the attenuation of eating disorders, particularly binge eating disorder or ultra-processed food addictions. Yes, there is an addiction for ultra-processed foods. Now, the purpose of this review is just to aim a highlight on this sort of area in life. I think people oftentimes think of addictions in way of drugs, but often they don't think about food. And the reality is food can act on the same reward pathways that, in fact, compounds do, such as cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin. This is a reality that we are facing with the ultra-processed food industry, and I wanted to share this with you. So the factors are many-fold here, but I'll touch on a few simply neurological ones that I've learned from this study. One, I learned that insulin secretion can actually downregulate the amount of dopamine receptors, decreasing the density of receptors, thus requiring a higher threshold of enjoyment to get a higher or adequate stimulation of dopamine. And that essentially means that if you're eating a lot of insulinogenic food and thus a lot of glucose, that you will be downregulating dopamine receptors, thus kind of needing more of that food stimuli to provide more dopamine to get the same adequate feeling of, wow, I've done that. What's interesting here is a low carbohydrate diet model actually does quite the opposite. It alters the GABA signaling, so it increases GABA inhibition, which would subsequently dampen reward pathways. It also increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which has been shown to attenuate a lot of eating disorders in and of itself, which is also a good thing, obviously, right? So we're dampening reward systems by eating less carbohydrate. Interesting to say the least. With that too, these eating disorders could probably be attenuated by a low carbohydrate diet due to the blood glucose stabilization and subsequently a change in hormones such as leptin, ghrelin, insulin, GLP-1 cascades, and it just will further modify natural reward systems that are physiological in nature. What I found really interesting and insightful was this review specifically quoted several studies that used fMRIs to scan human brains, determine the difference in functionality between different brain networks that may contribute to these eating disorders. What they found was there was massive changes in executive function and processing, specifically reward processing, that decreased sort of the resting state of connectivity between those units. There's also been a few studies done on what neurochemicals are released during these feeding periods where individuals are eating copious amounts of calories in a very short period of time. They found that very much like exercise, the window of eating can induce releases of other sort of neurotransmitters, dopamine, opioids, natural endogenous opioids, which we do have, endocannabinoids, we do have technically cannabis in our brain, and many other serotonin in other aspects. Hence, this binge eating can cause this nasty cycle where the consumption of these highly processed, highly sugary foods can spike, rapid blood glucose. It can then change the mesolimbic dopamine reward system and activate that pathway, increasing also subsequently insulin levels. You'll see a rapid fall in blood glucose thereafter, which will stimulate, again, hunger, no satiety, ghrelin secretion, and falling into that circle again of excessive hunger cravings and binge eating, then the consumption of high processed ultra sugary foods, then spiking, and it just goes in a circle, and you're really tweaking these reward pathways. There's been a lot of detailed studies that this review actually comments on, and I think they're worth taking a look at. And I know this is not a subject that a lot of people are willing to talk about, that food is an addiction, but I see this so often. I can't give up this, coach. There's no way I could give up this. And when you frame it as like a almost drug addiction, it changes the concept of what you're talking about. And I understand flexible dieting. I understand trying not to induce any sort of eating disorders within any clients. It is extremely important to do. But when it comes down to calling out an addiction and saying, hey, I think this is more than just a craving for you. I think there's actually something that needs to be looked at here outside of what's going on, just besides craving, right? So it's really important to kind of approach things with the open-mindedness and not so much the subjective mind and say, okay, I could potentially legitimately be addicted to particular foods. And what this study is really proposing is that the use of a sort of ketogenic or carnivore style or low carbohydrate diet could maybe attenuate these sort of cyclical nature of food addiction. And they could do it by basically improving the mesolimbic dopaminergic pathway so that when you do eat food, it's not as rewarding as potentially it could be by the upregulation or the upregulation in GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA aminobutyric acid, which is often used as a treatment in and of itself for substance abuse patients or addiction. Also, with its increased expression of brain-derived neurotrophic factor as a main pathway in which could potentially lower food intake. Higher levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor have been associated with lower levels of food intake in just general population. So that is another way that this could be happening. So, I don't mean to offend anyone. I think this study is extremely interesting. The prevalence of these disorders is very much increasing year after year. And so I think it's worth talking about, hey, are you addicted to food? Is this a reality in your world? And if you are, it's okay to talk about it. And there's these online coaches, and this is, once again, a very a loaded topic. And there's these online coaches that promote like healthy eating without having to cut out foods, and eating without measuring and stuff like that, and not feeling bad when you eat out. And I totally agree. I don't think you should feel bad when you eat out, but there's a very hard line between, am I addicted to eating out? Am I addicted to particular foods? Am I on the weekends engaging in activities that are related to binge eating? And if so, you really have to look at it from another side of or point of view, instead of taking comfort in these people online who are maybe posting about, hey, it's okay to do this. And I would argue that you wouldn't tell a heroin addict it's okay to bang heroin back every day. And similar to that, food addictions work on the same pathway for reward systems. And I just don't think it's very beneficial to play around with that system and engage in that activity and encouraging it and saying it's okay. I would rather say, okay, here's a plan of action. Here's what we can do. A lower carbohydrate diet might be for you. Take it as you will. I thought this video was worth putting out there. No, it was sort of a scrambled brain of thoughts and partially my opinion, but would encourage anyone to read this study for more information about this, and maybe look into specifically those mechanisms of actions of ultra-processed foods activating the mesolimbic reward system, or reward pathway rather, and much, much more. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a beautiful day. Deuces.